If you are a professional salesperson, you may have been trained or told or part of your sales process that you need to ask your customer what their budget is, how much you want to spend, what is your budget on this product or service. And there are some merits to asking that question. And if you're a consumer, you've probably heard that question asked many, many times. So we're going to talk about, as a salesperson, as a consumer, how to handle that question or inquiry about what is your budget. If you're a salesperson, you may want to reconsider even asking the question or how you ask it. And we're going to give you 5 bullet points about why it may actually be self-sabotage for you as a professional salesperson to ask the budget. First of all, the reason that's usually given in the sales training to ask the budget is to make sure that you're showing the right product, the right service, and there's some benefit to that. However, that's what's usually given on paper as the reason. Most often the reason it's done by a salesperson is because it's defeatist. If you're a professional salesperson, even in the highest, most advantageous professions, you're going to have a sales closing ratio that's single digits, maybe 10, maybe 20%, right? So most of the people you talk to are not going to buy something. That's normal. So you're going to have this rejection fear that builds up, that you're just to assume everybody that buys or everybody that you talk to is not going to buy. And what's the biggest reason that people say at the end of your sales process that they don't buy? They say it's too much money, or it's I can't afford it, or it's out of my budget. And that may be true, but it's really not because they can't afford it, they don't have the money, it's that they haven't seen the value yet. So instead of at first trying to be really intense on having the customer prove out their budget or what they want to spend, it's probably better to soft sell into that question, because even if you do somehow get a client to declare formally, very specifically, what their budget is, they're almost always going to hold back. So if you force somebody to put a number on the table in advance of even seeing a product or seeing a service, very likely they're just going to come up with a low number because they are already starting to feel that high pressure, intense environment that is kind of making them coil up. And that early part of the sales process, you want to have the customer be more open, and you want to have them create more connection with you as a salesperson, because a sales process is highly intimidating to many clients. By making it more intimidating, by putting them right on the spot, putting the spotlight on them, a budget, how much you got to spend, number one, you're not being collaborative, and you're not creating that rapport that you want with a customer. At the same time, you're talking about a very sensitive subject with a person, their budget, their money, their finances. That's not something that unfamiliar people talk about to begin with. Look, in some sales environments, it might be very appropriate that subject comes up, right? But even if it is, you want to handle it with diplomacy, with tactfulness. So what we recommend doing is, if you do need to actually get a budget before you can even start showing a product, do it in a way without directly asking, right? You can do that maybe by finding out what their current product is, maybe other parts of their life, what the product's going to be used for. We're going to use the example of a vehicle, a car. Obviously, if somebody's coming into a dealership and you're selling a vehicle, you don't want to show them a $100,000 vehicle if their budget is for a $30,000 vehicle, but you want to get in the right ballpark. You don't need to necessarily have it pinpointed exactly right, and here's why. Many times people come into a dealership looking for a $30,000 vehicle, if one exists anymore, and they end up driving out in a $50,000 vehicle. Why does that happen? Well, because sometimes people come in and they think they have a budget, but as you know, people get excited about a product. They get excited about features. They get very interested in having this new thing in their life. So their original budget they started out with sometimes goes out the window. That's what you want anyways. You want a customer to be excited about the product, so the purchase is about their need and their desire for a product, not about just this arbitrary budget. Certainly people do have budgetary constraints. People can't spend more than a certain amount. They may not be able to get approved for a loan for more than a certain amount, and that's something that you want to be able to avoid at the beginning. But to have that be part of the first thing you talk about sometimes will backfire on you, and you may lose customers that you didn't know why you lost it, but that's why it started at the very beginning. Certainly, if you start out on a product or service that's a little higher than maybe what they can afford, you may have to back down at some point later, but give the customer a way to do that. If you start out with something that's too low, a lot of times people think, well, if we start out with a base model of a vehicle, let's say, or a base model of a product or service, we can always go up. Well, not necessarily. Sometimes a person is so turned off by the sales process, or maybe that product is so kind of lackluster to them, they don't really want to change after that, right? If you start out with a vehicle that's too cheap, that has base equipment, no luxury equipment, they're not going to really want to look at anything that's above that. In fact, even if they do, let's say if you have a vehicle, I don't know, let's think of a vehicle, let's say a Toyota Camry that's an LE model, and they look at it and it's kind of good and it may have features they want, but they want something more luxury, and then you show them maybe an XLE model that has more luxury equipment, leather, sunroof, what have you. The problem now is when they go into the XLE, they're going to look and see this is basically the same thing as the LE. It's the same interiors, same, just with a few extra bells and whistles. So sometimes it may not be as appealing if you showed it to them to begin with, right? Showing them that upper level model might have got them so excited to begin with that it may have been a win for the sales process. There certainly may be scenarios where you do want to specifically ask a budget upfront with a sales client, but make sure that the reasons that you're doing it is because it's genuinely needed. Check yourself as a salesperson to make sure that you're not being defeatist, just trying to avoid that rejection later where somebody says, I can't afford it, where the real reason they couldn't afford it is they didn't see the value, or that you're not having a flashback of prior customers that told you it's too much money, and you think that's why the sale wasn't made. Certainly there are legitimate budget scenarios with people, but as a professional salesperson, I am sure that you know that some, if not most, of the sales successes that you have, if you look back at the actual client, they ended up spending more than originally they were thinking in their head. And that's fine. It's not like you did anything wrong. You didn't take advantage of a customer. Most clients, once they see a valuable product, they see a valuable service, are going to spend more than they originally thought that they wanted to or needed to, because they see, hey, this is going to be better for me than I originally thought. Even in a business-to-business transaction, a business might look at a potential service as being worth, I don't know, $500 a month because it's going to help their business this much. Once they see how valuable your service is and how valuable it's going to help their company, they might spend $1,000 a month because it's going to make them that much more money. So your job as a salesperson is to show that value in why whatever budget it is or whatever your cost is going to be worth it. Don't defeat yourself in advance by saying, well, they can't afford it anyway, so forget it. Right? Go through the process, because most times the value will take care of itself. Now, from a customer side, how do you approach that question? And as a salesperson, you can think about this and it'll help your sales process. If a salesperson asks you, what's your budget? How much do you have to spend? What do you do as a customer? Well, it's difficult because sometimes you don't know. Well, I don't know what I want to spend. Sometimes you think you do. Maybe if it's a house and you have a mortgage, pinpointed mortgage budget in your head, you have that set. If it's a vehicle, maybe you can only afford so much. That's fine. But the way you want to approach it is, look, I don't have a budget, and as a business, we have people try to sell us stuff all the time, and a lot of salespeople selling us business services will ask us how much you have to spend. We tell them we don't have a budget. There's no limit. If something will make us $2 million as a business, I got $1 million to spend on it. My budget is unlimited if it will help me make more money. If you're a consumer, well, I don't have a budget, right? If the thing is, so valuable and so worthy of my life, I'll spend whatever I need to, right? How much would you spend to save your life? Let's say you were arrested and charged with murder and you had to pay an attorney to get you out of jail. How much would you spend? As much as I could. There's no budget. No amount I wouldn't spend, right? So On the other hand, if something isn't worth anything, if something isn't going to help my business get bigger and it costs $1, I can't afford that $1. $1 is too much if it makes me nothing. As a consumer, how much do you have to spend on something that's worthless to you? If it cost $1, do you have the budget for that? No, I don't. So think about it as a consumer, that mentality, and even as a salesperson. Remember, your customer has a budget depending on what it's worth. If it's worthless to them, it's not even worth $1. They can't afford $1. So as a consumer, if you're challenged, if you're put into a corner on that question, how much you have to spend, you can tell them, look, if it's worth a lot to me in terms of value, lifestyle, comfort, business improvement, whatever the case is, I got a lot of money to spend. It's not a matter if I can't afford it. Is that what you're asking me, Mr. or Mrs. Salesperson? Can I afford it? Am I a deadbeat? You can kind of turn it around and make it seem like they're questioning your value, right? You don't have to get confrontational, but you can say, well, if you're asking me if I can afford it, I can afford this thing I'm looking at. I can afford your product. So don't worry about whether or not I can afford it. Don't try to pin me down on a number to paint me into a corner. On the other hand, I'm here to find out if this thing will help me, not to find out whether or not I can afford it. I'll figure that out for myself. And as a salesperson, now your job is to prove the value. Certainly there may be some part of that sales process where you get into pricing and maybe negotiation, maybe structuring the finance or payments of it in a certain way to help the customer. But your product or service costs whatever it costs, right? You can't really change that. Now, if you're selling a house that's $600,000, the house is going to cost $600,000. If you're selling a car that costs $60,000, your car costs $60,000. The price is not going to change too much. In fact, the amount of price that it might change isn't going to change their budget that much. So stick to getting something that matches the customer. Now, matching the customer's needs is a valuable thing. You can ask them how you're going to use this product, how you're going to use this service, how you're going to put it into your lifestyle or into your business if it's a business-to-business transaction. That's your job to match it up. If you get to the point where the product or service that they need to fulfill their needs as a consumer or business doesn't match the financial realities, well, that's not your problem, not your fault, right? You're not going to find that out till the end. Don't try to save yourself the time of a sales presentation by trying to figure out in advance whether or not they can afford it by asking their budget. It doesn't serve you well as a salesperson because you're going to miss out on sales opportunities, and it doesn't serve your customer for at least finding out about your product. And even if that customer decides later that, you know what, I thought I needed leather, sunroof, turbo, whatever it is on the car, but I really don't want to spend the money. When they see that you took the time to walk them through that process, they're going to come back to you later once they discover that on their own. They don't need you to prove that to them. And if they do, or if that's your role as a salesperson to try to kind of prove somebody that they can't afford it, you're just going to alienate yourself as a professional salesperson. So to summarize, asking about a budget or finding out about a general budget for a potential customer or prospect is important. Making it a very specific, formalized agreement in advance can backfire, and most customers just aren't going to have it. And the ones that do fall for that line of questioning and fall for that line of intimidation probably aren't good customers anyways, because if you can do it to them, somebody else did it before and they probably have no credit, no money, and they're not going to be good prospects anyways. You want to learn how to work with clients that are sure of themselves, that have confidence, that know how to work through a sales process, because that way you'll be dealing with people that have more of an authority, more power to be able to purchase, because the ones you can just slam dunk into just admitting up front that this is their budget and you can manipulate them through the process, they're probably going to get to the end of that and they're not going to have credit anyways, or not have be able to get financed for whatever your product is anyways, or they don't have the money for it because somebody else already took their money. If you're able to manipulate them, somebody else already did in their life. So work with more quality prospects and learn how to do that by not feeling the self-doubt that you need to know in advance what their budget is. Because if you if you have to have the customer pass that litmus test to prove themselves to work with you, then you're kind of defeating the purpose of being a professional salesperson and going through that process. Look, even if you spend 2 hours on a sales pitch with a customer that turns out they really can't afford it, it's good practice. You're practicing your sales skills on that customer. Unless you got 20 people lined up the door that you have to do triage on customers, don't worry about the fact that you might maybe waste their time or waste your time on doing a sales presentation. If you get rejected at the end, you can get over yourself, right? Don't fear that rejection, and don't try to alleviate that pain of being rejected by trying to filter it out in advance, by trying to force a budget declaration out of a customer. It'll help you in the long run. It'll get you more sales. It'll get you more satisfied customers, and it'll make whatever conversions you do have be more valuable to you in terms of gross profit and commissions, and also more valuable to the customer in terms of having a good sales process that they can either come back to again for another product or refer to other buyers. Good luck with selling, and as a buyer, good luck working with a professional salesperson to achieve the results you want for a product or service.